In this video, I'll show you how to solve the ALEKS problem called predicting relative bond polarity. This problem is going to give you three molecules. Each molecule is going to have one of its bonds highlighted in red, and that's the only thing that we need to focus on in these molecules. We can ignore everything else. Just focus on those two atoms and the bond that has been highlighted in red. And our job is to arrange these red bonds in order of decreasing polarity. So what you're going to find when you're looking at these three bonds is that each one of them will have one atom in common. So all three of mine have a carbon atom in common, and then they will each have their other atom is going to be different from each other. And so what we're looking at here is the difference in polarity between carbon-oxygen versus carbon-nitrogen versus carbon-carbon. The difference in polarity has to do with the difference in electronegativity between those two elements, which has to do with their relative position on the periodic table. So if the two elements are far apart from each other, that means that they are going to have a bigger difference in electronegativity, which means that they are going to be more polar. And so what we are going to do is locate all of these atoms on the periodic table. First, my carbon atom, which is the thing that they all have in common. And then I'm going to look at the distance between carbon and oxygen versus the distance between carbon and nitrogen versus the distance between carbon and carbon. That's kind of funny to say. Obviously, carbon and carbon are as close together as you can get, which means that they have the smallest electronegativity, which means that they're the least polar, which looks like I'm going to be giving that a 3 based on the numbers here. 1 is the most polar, 2 is the next most polar. Okay, so if they're identical atoms, that's as nonpolar as you can get, or as least polar as you can get. So let's focus on what we have left. We have carbon-oxygen versus carbon-nitrogen. So on our periodic table, we are looking at carbon-oxygen, which is pretty close together, versus carbon-nitrogen. Those are side by side. So carbon and nitrogen are more close together. Carbon and oxygen are further apart than carbon and nitrogen, which means that carbon-oxygen have the biggest electronegativity differences, which means that it is the most polar. So carbon-oxygen is going to be the most polar. Carbon-nitrogen is going to be number 2.